It's such a pleasure to be with Alberto Crane. As a jiu-jitsu guy, Alberto, you're a jiu-jitsu legend, fifth degree black belt. You were the former King of the Cage MMA champion. You fought in the UFC. You run your Legacy Academy in LA, and I know you're promoting Tac-Fit, which I can't wait to talk to you about. So it's such a pleasure as a jiu-jitsu guy to be talking to you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Really appreciate us making this happen. I'm excited to talk to you. Mm-hmm.
So, Alberto, can we start back? Because I always think it's so interesting. Now, obviously, jiu-jitsu is such a big part of your life. But if young Alberto wasn't exposed to jiu-jitsu, it's wild to think about whichever direction your life would have taken. Why do you think it was jiu-jitsu that just captured everything about you? You went to Brazil to train. It really took over your life. When looking back to young Alberto, what do you think it was? Why it captured you so much?
After high school, I wasn't too sure like which direction I was going to go into. My first actually jiu-jitsu coach, I used to live in a place called Santa Fe, New Mexico, like a small town. After high school, I went to high school in New York City and grew up in Germany, lived in a lot of different places. But I wasn't sure which way I was going to go. My family's a bunch of educators, so of course they wanted me to go to university. But my first jiu-jitsu coach was a Navy SEAL. And so he kind of talking to me about, these Navy SEAL things, and I got really excited. Your question was, which way would I have gone, correct?
Well, just like, why do you think jiu-jitsu, something about, because you said your family's from educators. Why do you think jiu-jitsu appealed to you so much?
Right. I think I wasn't too sure where I was going to go. And jiu-jitsu, it grounded me. And so that first jiu-jitsu coach, who was a Navy SEAL guy, he had a class once a week. And then he had a class twice a week, and I wasn't sure which way I was going to go. And I just loved the way it made me feel. I trained so hard. I remember training so hard, and it just really brought out the best in me. And just because of that, really, just made me feel good. And I structured my whole schedule around those. First was one class, and then 2 classes a week. And then, I think just because of it, just grounded me. I think that was the first initial thing. It made me feel good.
And then as a Westerner, for you to move to Brazil to train, you just wanted to go all in. Is that why you just couldn't get enough training in the US at the time?
So I had a really, one of my best friends is Amal Easton. He's like a big brother to me. He runs a bunch of gyms in Colorado, Easton BJJ. They have Colorado. They're the people. They have like 9 locations, and he went down to Brazil first. And he went down to Brazil first. He had just graduated from Chinese medical school, right? Like acupuncture as an acupuncturist. And he went down there, and then he came back, and then we started training in his garage every day. And then I went down soon after. I was like, okay, I have to go too. And we went down the next year. And then after that, he was like, man, you got to read this book from Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. And so I loved the way it made me feel. I loved what it did to me. I love the focus it gave me, but the laser focus was when I read that book, Think and Grow Rich. That was the big shift. It gave me laser-like focus.
Well, but I've heard so many people talk about that book. I think, is it Rafael Lovato Jr.? I think he's talked a lot about that too.
Possibly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just read it last year, and it's written in 1937. And I'm reading this book. I was on vacation with my wife and son. And I'm like, how is this book so relevant today? It's nearly a century old. And I mean, it's just, there's so many pages. I'm like, this applies 100% today. And I actually wrote down a beautiful quote. It said, millions of men go through life in misery and poverty because they don't possess the right plan. And it just gives you, it's so good for just setting your intentions and setting your goals. So I can only imagine as a young man reading that, falling in love with jiu-jitsu, going to Brazil, you're like, okay, I'm going to really make something out of this.
Yeah, because there wasn't, back in those days, there wasn't like a future. There wasn't like a career path, right? It was like Fight Club days, right? But if you watched the early UFCs, it was kind of Valetudo. It was nuts, right? So for me to do that, I didn't really have a plan. I followed my heart. But then I definitely set a goal for myself, and that was the difference. Do you know the story behind that, by the way, of Napoleon Hill, how we wrote the book? So Andrew Carnegie at the time, it's interesting, right? Andrew Carnegie at the time, he was the richest man in the world, and he told Napoleon Hill, he's like, listen, I'm going to get you these interviews with all the most successful people in the world, like the Gerald Fords, the Charles Schwabs, the who's who, right? I'm not going to pay you anything, but I want you to write a book about these guys and things that, make them successful. And so I think it took him about 10 years. And after he he after the 10 years, he wrote the book, and he had the same, auto-suggestion, mastermind principle, I mean, all the principles in Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, right? And it's tested and proven, right? Over and over and over. They all did the same things, right? To be successful. So you can say the book's called the Think and Grow Rich, but it's the science of success, right? It's really the science of success. And man, I still read it today. It's things I wasn't mature enough to understand back when I was younger that I understand now. It's really, really something else. Quantum physics. It's all it's all there. Quantum field. It's all there. How to tap into that. And it was over 100 was it 100 years ago? Almost 100 years ago.
Almost 100.
Probably, yeah, it's crazy.
What's so cool? It's what you said is so cool too, because you're such a different person to when you were, 19, 20. So when you read it now, you have all the life philosophy, all the life experience you've lived. So I'm sure you get this different wisdom out of it, different layers. So that's so good. Correct. That's one thing I've started doing, Alberto, is things I read books when I was younger that really influenced me. And now when I read them again, it's a completely different book because I'm a different person.
Yeah, that's it. Interesting, right? How that happens.
But right now, jiu-jitsu has become so big that there's all these different career paths. But like you said, back then, there wasn't a career path. So were you thinking, so what was your goal? Was your goal to, at the time, like get your black belt?
I never even wrote down that I want to get my black belt. I just knew I wanted to be one of the best in the world. And so that's what I wrote down. And then that's how I ended up moving to Brazil, because that's where it was. That's where you had to go to be the best. You had to learn and train with the best, right? To do that.
People are so spoiled now that they'll go to, almost like a local jiu-jitsu gym, and there'll be a few black belts on the mat. And I remember when I started, a purple belt was a big deal because there just wasn't many people there. And I remember actually, you just reminded me about it. I remember writing some goals down. And at the time I was always focused on boxing was my love, but I had this dream one day to fight MMA. So I would do jiu-jitsu a little bit, but I always hated it. I came from a striking background, and I found jiu-jitsu so awkward. So it's so hard when you're good at one thing, doing the thing you're weak at. But I remember forcing myself to go, and I remember writing down my goals, and black belt was so far away then, I couldn't even write down black belt. I think I wrote down a seasoned purple belt. But that was my long-term goal because it's just so far away. But that's so cool. So when you went to Brazil, how did you choose, which gym to go to? Because I'm sure there's so many there, which city to go to.
So my friend Amal Easton, he went to Rio de Janeiro. And so we went, the place back in the 90s was Gracie Barra. The who's who was there. They had all the champions, different games, different styles. Really, it was really a special place, And so he went there. And so obviously when I went back, I moved to Rio. He lived in we lived in Barra de Tijuca, Gracie Barra, right? And we lived on this little island. Yeah, I can go on stories, but yeah, we lived on this little island that we had to actually paddle. We had to take a little boat to the front, and then we had to paddle a boat in the lagoon to get to our house, because it was like a not abandoned house. A guy kind of took care of it, but it was like abandoned. But it had a room and had electricity and had water. Not that we were drinking the water, but we got filtered water. But we got a filter for the water. Yeah, it worked. It worked, and I was able to get from home to the gym, But I chose Gracie Barra. We went to Gracie Barra because Amal was there, and then soon after that, that's a good question, right? Soon after that, I met Draculino. I met him in Rio when he went to train one time, and then one of his students brought me to Belo Horizonte, and he was just starting his gym in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and I decided to go and move and train with him. And at the time, like I said, there were only white belts and blue belts. A few blue belts. He was just starting his gym, but I really liked the environment that was there. Like, people were really cool, really like down to earth, and I felt like I was one of them, like part of the family. And they were good too. They were really technically good. And of course, Draculino is so charismatic and, personable. And so I was like, man, I came back to US after being in Brazil for 6 months. And then I was like, after I go back, I'm going to move to Belo Horizonte to train with you. And it was a big jump because in Rio de Janeiro was the place where all the big tournaments were, and where all the who's who of black belts were as well, So it was like, why am I going to there's one black belt in whites and blues. And I was like, it was basically because I felt really at home there. I felt good there. Draculino really cared because we were like his first group of students, right? To make his mark, So he put all of his, I felt that energy. He wanted everybody to get really, really good. And so I decided to go to train with Draculino.
I'm so glad you said that about just the environment, the way you felt, because I have a lot of people ask me, especially some of my older friends who want to get their kids in jiu-jitsu, and they're asking me, hey, like, well, how do I choose a gym? And that's what I always say. If I don't know the city they're in, I don't personally know. I always say, just go to a few places and just feel the energy, feel the vibe, talk to the instructor, see how he's like with his students. And when you find a place that feels like home, that's where you want to stay.
Exactly. You can be a 20-time world champion, but if you don't feel right in the place, it's not the right place for you. So that's it. That's exactly it, right? That's what I recommend as well. Go to the place, feel it out, see if it's the right place for you, and then you'll know almost right away, right? If it's the right place for you.
Did they accept you as a foreigner? Were they very welcome, just in general in Brazil?
So in Rio, that was one of the things, right? In Rio de Janeiro, there were a lot of foreigners, but there's quite a few foreigners coming from all over the world trying to learn jiu-jitsu, right? Because it was for UFC, the Mecca, right? And so a lot of foreigners would go to Brazil, to Rio, to learn jiu-jitsu, right? So I was just another gringo. And then when I went to Belo Horizonte, I wasn't just another gringo because there weren't any gringos going there. Even though I met a guy that was a gringo that took me over there, but I was like one of them, I was one of them, and that's how I felt. I felt I was part of the team, part of the family, really, and that was the big difference.
So, Alberto, I'm thinking about that. I remember when you just reminded me that simplistic life when you're young. It's such a good time to do it. When I first graduated, I graduated college and then I had a job offer and they gave me a few months. I asked to delay it a few months, and I always dreamed about fighting in Thailand, and I was Thai boxing in college. So I went to Thailand and I rented this little room in this rundown house and I trained twice a day. And I had such a simple life. At the time, Thailand's still cheap, but back then it was almost nothing. I had a tiny bit of money and it lasted me a few months and I just trained twice a day. And I just remember being so happy with that simplicity. Looking back, it's such fond memories. As you get older, your life tends to get more complicated, especially if you settle down, you have a family, but they were just such great days. But I just did that for a couple of months. Then I had some savings, I spent it all. Then I came back and I started working. How did you, just logistically, how did you survive in terms of financially? How did you, was there issues with visas? Was it difficult or was it pretty easy to make that trip?
Yeah, I would say it's you gotta, it's like a commitment thing, right? Like you can, and so first time I went down there, I saved my money. I worked at a restaurant that Amal worked at as well. It was like a fine dining restaurant. It was the only other job I had besides jiu-jitsu. I'm always proud to kind of say it too, because I had met a lot of great people there in Santa Fe. And so I saved my money. And so the first time I went for 6 months to save my money, and then I saved some money to go to the next time because I was doing college courses and things at the time as well. And then what I ended up doing is I ended up going to Brazil, and then 6 months in, because you get 6 month, you had said visas, and you're allowed to, at that time you could stay for 6 months, and then you have to leave the country. And so I ended up staying. I was like, no, I'm not done yet. Actually, after a year, I was like, I'm not done yet. And so I had a credit card that had a $20,000 limit. I still have that credit card today, just because out of nostalgia and whatever. They invested in me, in a way. Well, they didn't invest in me. I paid. I'm sure I paid lots of interest, right? But I was able to take cash advance and stuff, and so I just basically lived off that credit card and stayed the course, until I felt like I was done. And so I ended up staying there for about 3.5 years straight,
Wow.
At that time.
And so when did you feel you were done? You felt like you'd got good enough where you wanted to come home and were you thinking, I want to go home, I want to teach, or were you thinking, I want to go home, I want to keep competing?
I think I was like one of the best blue belt, purples, and then brown, but I got my brown belt, so I had medaled in the open weight and the Brasileiros, and I was a lightweight guy, so I was like, man, you're pretty good, and so I ended up, I was like, okay, where am I going to go? I could stay in Santa Fe, New Mexico. My friend Amal Easton was inviting me to Boulder, Colorado to stay with him. Maybe I was trying to figure it out. And then I just asked myself, like, if there's any place I could choose, where would I want to live? Right. Not big city, not this, that, business wise. And I was like, I want to stay here in Santa Fe. And so business wise, it didn't make sense because it was a small town of, 60,000 people, not a lot of money as well, like income and stuff. So I ended up staying in Santa Fe because that's where I felt at home. And so I just started teaching at this Aikido place. I just went and shook hands, and the guy was like, "Oh, I have availability for you to teach here like twice a week." At this time, I was like, "Okay." So I put flyers all around town. Back in those days, there was no internet or, whatever the QR codes or whatever the things we have now. So I just put it up at all the bulletin boards, like the local gyms, and I put like, "Do you know how to defend yourself?" And I put a picture up, and then people could take the little paper on the bottom, my number, and they called me, And so I started with 1, 2, and then 5, 10, and then they kind of blew up like almost right away. And I had like over 30 students, and then it was like an Aikido place. So the guy, and then, Jiu-Jitsu is gnarly, right? You bleed, and there's like, whatever, it's sports tape and different things. And we were kind of, a little messy. And he had white canvas mats. And so we're bleeding all over his mats. And then I think he got a little bit jealous, or I don't know what it was, that, we had so many people there training. It was people that they knew. And then, the word spread, right? And so they were telling their friends, and I was like, all right, like, I guess he kind of kicked me out in a way. I guess I have to get a new place. And at that same time, one of my students was a real estate guy. And he's like, "Man, I have this place. It's only temporary. It's only for like the spring, summer, beginning of fall." It was a ski rental business. And so in the summertime and the downtime, they weren't using it. And it's like, they're looking for somebody to go in there. The good thing was it was right on the main street. So if we put a sign, everybody in town was going to see it. And so I was like, that could work, And so we made a deal, and it made sense, and so I got a couple signs, right, and got in that main location, really good location, and then it just blew up. My mom was always really smart too with getting me doing interviews and stuff for like PR things, for newspapers back in the days. Like, they still read newspapers over there, coincidentally, but it was before the internet, right? So I did some newspaper articles and did a bunch actually because she was on it, and she's a proud mom, And so, people just word of mouth, newspaper articles, like the PR, whatever stuff I could do. And then we just grew, and I did a good job. I was 23 years old at the time. And I always took it, really serious, like I was always professional. It's interesting, that I look back and I'm like, wow, I really took it serious. I really respected just the way of life, the martial art and what it did for me. And just, I was always really professional. It tripped me out because I was, even at that age, I took it really serious, and it grew. And then as soon as the lease was over for that first year, I found a permanent location right down the street. Also a great location, but it was smaller. It was a smaller spot, but it was great. And we grew. And then after that, we bought a building and put it in there. And then, just kept going, kept going.
Alberto, to be so young and to be so entrepreneurial is amazing, because it's one thing being a really good competitor, but then obviously you had they had the mindset to build a business. They're two completely different skills, right? You can be a great competitor and you'd be terrible in business. But even just what you said about you're really good about getting your name out there, because I'm sure for people that weren't familiar with martial arts, a brown belt who won the Brasileiro in Brazil is such an amazing achievement. But if you don't know jiu-jitsu, that's kind of over your head. So you have to market yourself. But Alberto, can we go back a little bit? Because I've heard you talk on other shows and things where you said you won, when you started competing, you kind of had a rough start of it. And, for you to be a lightweight winning the absolute division, a brown belt at the top tournaments in Brazil, that is so huge. So for people that aren't so familiar with jiu-jitsu, that's an incredible achievement that you just said. Can you take us back to the early days, like when you first started competing? You were having some trouble because there's a great quote. I was rereading Napoleon Hill, getting ready for this, and he said, "We often overlook great men who had to overcome temporary defeats before arriving." And that's what I thought of you with when you talked about some of your early days, because you went from kind of having a rough start of it to winning kind of the pinnacle in Brazil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I first started competing, we went to wherever I could go, but a lot of times I had to, of course, not a lot of time, every time pretty much I had to travel to compete. So, that was, I worked really hard and have a lot of money, slept in airports sometimes, slept at people's houses, right? Whatever I could do to make it happen. And I lost my first 13 tournaments.
Wow.
Okay. It was always blue belt. So I never competed as a white belt, but as a blue belt, yeah, I started competing and then I lost my first 13 tournaments. And people ask me sometimes like, man, what are you most proud of? What achievement are you most proud of? And something that's given me value in my life, that's really made me strong in everything that I've done in my life, is that one moment of losing 13 tournaments in a row and persevering and trying again. Because when I won that first tournament, I was a world-class blue belt, and I would never have known that if I would have stopped. I got bronze and blue belt that year in the Worlds. I had there's six matches to get there, and I would have never have known. And I took that all the way to black belt, and I would never have known I was one of the top guys already if I would have stopped. After I lost my 13 tournament, and everything. I can always, my inner belief is just so strong because of that, no matter what I do, I'm like, people say, oh, you're fearless, you're this and that. And because when I was young, you're trying to prove yourself, right? This and that. And I was putting everything into competing, and I have to go back. How'd you do? Oh, I lost, I lost my first match, my second match, whatever. It was always like that pretty much. And it was hard, right? It was very hard. And it didn't make sense for me to keep going, but there was like a little voice inside of me. And then of course, when I read Think and Grow Rich, to persevere, right. And all that, it just made me so strong in my life and everything that I've done. And so like, I'll never give up, it's a mindset thing. And just that experience made those neurons connect in my brain and my body and my spirit. And, it's something else. It's something else.
That's so great for people to hear, Alberto, because it's so easy for someone, say you have a new student that comes in, they see you 5th degree black belt, you've got all these accolades, and it's easy for them to think, oh, it's easy for Alberto, he's this stud, but it's not easy for me. But having the fact that it wasn't easy, not only does it make you so much more mentally resilient, but it's also such a great story for people to listen to, because then when they're in that situation, they're not going to give up. And I mean, how many times in, not just in jiu-jitsu or combat sports, but just in life, in business, in relationships, we give up so much. So often we give up too easy. And I'm sure it's the same for you, but anything that I'm most proud of in my life was always hard. It was never easy. If you just showed up and you were some phenom and you just won everything, I'm sure it wouldn't mean as much as what it meant to finally, win these big titles after a kind of a rough start.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for sure. For sure. But just that the lesson for me was that just, I could have stopped, and so I didn't, and I'm just, wow, it just connected the neurons, and so it created something inside of me. And so if you keep going, right, and no matter what you do, you keep going, you learn, if you make mistakes, hopefully, you're gonna end up winning for sure. You just got to be able to take the hits, right, and keep moving forward.
You just reminded me of, being from England, we love Winston Churchill over there, and he had this great quote: "If you're going through hell, keep going." And
that's it.
When I talk to friends that are going through tough times, that's always the best advice. like even if everything's just absolute shit around them and they've got all these issues, it's like, listen, just keep going one day at a time. Just keep going, and eventually you will break through. That's just such great advice.
I remember being in Brazil, right, looking out the window and like thinking to myself, like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? Like, It made no sense at the time, you know. Now it makes sense for people because we have a massive gym, massive gyms, and big network, and But at the time, it didn't make any sense. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And I just followed my heart, right, and my passion.
Alberto, did you have an idea at the time that like this is something I can take this back to America? I can get a life. Did you even know you'd be able to create a life out of jiu-jitsu or not?
No, definitely not. I didn't think about that. I just and I started my classes in Santa Fe, New Mexico, because I wanted to have a place to train, and then it grew, and then you want to do things right. I have to give credit to my family. I have a great family, so they kind of instilled certain values of doing things the right way, treating people the right way, and so I think just because I just did things a certain way, the things just grew, and they've always had, ever since I'm doing this.
It's such a, I love hearing that, Alberto, because, I have my son's about to turn 3, and I think about when he's older, if he doesn't know what he wants to do, what I'm going to say to him. And I think that Steve Jobs he gave a commencement speech at the university before he passed away. And he said something along the lines of, when you're working hard and following your passion, you have to have the confidence that in the future, the dots are going to kind of connect, even if you don't see it now. And I feel like that's just such good advice for people is don't get too caught up in trying to figure out the future because, things change, you're going to change, opportunities are going to arise and come and go. But if you just focus on what you can control now, hopefully in the future, the dots will connect. And I love hearing that because that's exactly what happened with your story.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. You just got to believe, right? You got to believe and definitely have an intention, definitely write down your goals, I think, but then how you get there, man, we don't know. And success isn't a straight line, right? It's up and down and side to side. And you just got to stay the course, right? And set your goals, definitely set. And it might change too, right? As you go. But definitely set. For me, that's been helpful to always have a goal, always have like an intention, and putting like reading Napoleon Hill that really set for me those foundations.
So when did you, because you seem like such a nice guy, but you're an old school jiu-jitsu guy. And I feel like old school jiu-jitsu guys had something like, I want to compete in MMA because that's represent jiu-jitsu in MMA. What made you want to fight in MMA?
I wanted to say a couple of things, one more thing on the past, why the school business, this and that. And one of the other principles is gaining specialized knowledge, right? And so I went to Brazil for that, but then the same formula goes for, running a good business, right? Learning from people that are better than me at those things, that have experience, So that's something that I've always used in my life to just be good, get good at whatever I want to do.
Right. Find a mentor so did you have a mentor that was doing well teaching?
Mentors, for sure. Maul was a big one, right? He was already doing it, but then we found more and more and more, we find mentors, right? And learn and then implement, right? Do it. Just do it. Yeah. What was the question you asked me?
What made you want to make the switch to MMA? Because you seem such a calm guy. You don't seem like I'm sure when you were younger, you had a lot more fire, but we all get more relaxed as we get older.
Right. Being a dad and all that. It's changed. But I think for me, I never thought I would fight MMA because in those early days in the 90s, it was all like Vale Tudo.
Yeah.
Bare knuckle, like, anything goes, right? And so I never thought that I would do MMA, but then I got my black belt and something inside of me was like, man, I want to see if this stuff works in the cage. I wanted to challenge myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so King of the Cage came to New Mexico. And so I called Greg Jackson, Jackson's whatever, what do they call it in UFC? Yeah. Whatever, the Jackson wink, so I called him up. Because I was like, hey, are these guys coming to New Mexico? And like, yeah. It's like, okay, cool. I think I want to get on the car to prove and see if this stuff works, And I was representing jiu-jitsu as well. I wanted to represent jiu-jitsu. There weren't too many jiu-jitsu guys fighting as well, these kind of events, like not higher level jiu-jitsu. And I was very proud of my jiu-jitsu acumen and what I had done. And so then I fought, did my first fight. And, Yeah, they put me on the undercard, or they tried to put me on the undercard, and not that I was planning on it, but they're like, "Oh, how much do they pay?" And they're like, "Oh, like $300, but we'll give you percentage of the ticket sales." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." And then I was like, and so I put on that same damn credit card. I'd paid it off since that time. I put $10,000 of tickets on that credit card. And so then they're like, okay, cool. And I sold them all because it was my first time fighting at an event in New Mexico after traveling around the world for a lot of years and competing in jiu-jitsu. Of course, I had the school in Santa Fe at that time already. And so then I sold them all basically. And then they moved me up from the undercard to pretty much the semi-main event. Dan Severn was after me, you know?
Wow.
Remember Dan Severn?
Yeah. That was the coolest.
Yeah. So he was the main event, and I was a semi-main event because of all the ticket sales that I did, you know. And it just started from there, and then they wanted me to fight again, of course, because I sold tickets, and then at the time Javier Vasquez was the champ, and he walked around that first event like he was like better than everybody, you know. And I was like, who is that guy? And I'm really nice to everybody. And then he was like rude to me, or just like stuck up. He acted like stuck up to me. And I was like, all right, I want to fight this guy. And so I told the promoter that. And then I didn't want to fight the second time because there was like no money. I was like, that's not worth my time. Like, all right. And so they canceled that event. And then they had another event in December. And they're like, listen, if you fight here, it'll be the same pay, but we'll give you a title shot. I was like, all right, sounds good. And so that's how it kind of happened. And then I fought, the Javi Vasquez for the King of the Cage title for my third fight. I won that fight, then went to the third fight. And then it was on pay-per-view, and it got like a lot of views. It was, I think the guys told me it got more views, more people watching than the UFC at the time. BJ Penn and Carl Luna, their second fight. I don't know, because they were both like grapplers, and it was a good fight. And then after that, I walked away from that because I was like, there was no money. And I was like, can you guys pay me a little more, But
after that, you'd kind of proved that you proved to yourself and to other people that, jiu-jitsu works and you can do it in a combat situation. When you went in those early fights, were you thinking, I'm just going to get it to my strong point, jiu-jitsu, or were you trying to learn striking? And like, did you enjoy trying to learn the things you weren't good at, or were you just trying to focus on what you were good at?
I definitely played what I was good at, because one of the first fight I did, I did the Team Brasileiro. So I did that in May. I did the fight in June, and then I had the Mundials in July. So I was doing it in between. I trained. Wow. Greg Jackson helped me and prepared, and so I was working on my striking, but for sure I just did it enough to be able to close the distance, take him down. All right, that was for sure the intent, and then after I did that King of the Cage shot, I walked away, and then somebody else called me from Colorado. You want to go up there? And just kind of kept going, And then after that, I got invites to fight in Japan, which is cool, right? As a martial artist, and so that it just kept going, until I had pretty much 8 fights. And then they got rid of the UFC lightweight division, or they got rid of the lightweight divisions in the UFC. And so I took a break after that, and then focused on, being able to provide for my family in the future. I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to keep doing what I love to do, but I had to figure it out, And so I started to study and learn business things as well.
Alberto, one thing I took a sabbatical when I was younger. I was trading, and I did quite well for myself. So I took a 5-year sabbatical, and I had 10 MMA fights, 1 amateur, 9 pro, just local in the Midwest. And it was really just for me. I had this. I was a Chicago Golden Glove champion. I was a purple belt at the time, and I was like, I didn't want to be 50 years old and have regrets and look back and be like, why didn't I do it when I could have done it? And it was so hard because I wasn't, I don't think I'm a natural athlete, and I just worked really hard, and I did okay. And I'm so proud of myself that I have so many fond memories when I look back.
Yeah.
But one thing I always thought, and I met my wife just after that, and she always says, man, I don't know if I could have been with you when when you were fighting, because I would have just been too nervous. And at the back of my mind, I was always thinking, this is something to do before I have a family. And one thing being a dad is I was worried I would lose motivation, Alberto. But being a father, it's given me so much motivation, but it's definitely made me a lot less aggressive. Like I'm so much calmer. I'm so much happier. Did you have your family after your MMA career?
So I took that sabbatical, and for the 2.5 years, I didn't fight, and I just focused on building the gym. And we opened up a second location and did some good business moves, in that process. But Joe Silva, who was the UFC matchmaker at the time, was inviting me to fight in the UFC. And back in those days, that was a big deal. There weren't that many events, So
was that before when you were fighting? Was that before
yeah, so
you had your family?
So I started fighting before I had my family. So after, so I focused on this, and then I had my family after that. But I went back after that. I went back. I answered the call to go fight in the UFC after my sabbatical, and then I continued on while I had my son, and then I had my son, and then I have my twin girls like a year and a half later. So then I kind of started doing less and less, and that's how I kind of went down a different way. But yeah, I stopped, and then I started again, and I think that's the right to as a family, as a dad. You don't want that kind of energy. You don't want to have the mom, the mom being stressed out about you and your well-being, right? You don't want to have that energy. I think.
Look, I always think about that when you see these guys in UFC that have their families there and their young kids cage-side, then they have these brutal fights, or bad knockout in front of their family. And I'm like, man, that's got to be so tough. And I understand why they want their family there, for their support system, but it's just got to be so hard. You watch the fights, and a lot of the time you just see it as an athletic performance, and you forget that they're actually people with family and feelings, and there's so many emotions around fighting. But it's easy just to watch the fights and forget about that. I just watched. There's a documentary. I don't know if you remember her, but there was the first kind of on the Tyson undercards. There was a female champion, Christy Martin, and she was like, Yeah, she was. Yeah. So I've always heard of her, and I saw some clips of her fights, but I didn't know much about her. And there's this documentary on Netflix about her I was watching the other day, and it was just talking about how she married her trainer, and he was like physically abusive, and like they sparred, and he knocked her out the only time she'd been knocked out, and then they would get in fights, and he would like beat her up. So she's there, the champion, fighting these women, but she's also she's with her trainer. Every day she goes home, they're fighting at home. So she's dealing with all this other stuff, but you don't even see that you turn on like, oh, she's fighting, and you just see this fighter, and you don't realize all the backstory behind these people. So I just thought that was such a good reminder for me is just remember, it's so easy to forget that these people, they have all the feelings that we have, and you must have had it too, where it's so easy to see people and you can criticize their performance, but you forget all the life stuff that's going behind the scenes for them.
I have, the 3 kids. One of my daughters is like a hardcore jiu-jitsu competitor. And so she's it's interesting. She's the only girl. She started wrestling, and she just went to it was her first year in high school. So she's wrestling too now in high school, and she's wired differently. My son is like a little bit like me, but she's the one who's like, she wants to compete. She wants to get out there, and she's wired differently, So I think like some of the wrestling families and certain, you grow a different way. Where like that's just what you do, some of the wrestling guys bringing the families to the UFC, and some of these fighters, like it's like who they are, what they do, right? And it is what it is, right? I mean, it's kind of brutal though, seeing your dad get knocked out, right? And
it's gonna be tough. But it
looks like he got killed, Looks like he got killed, And but it is what it is. Like, is it good, bad? Like, I don't know. It's part of life, Like, and I think. Yeah, I think it's all how we perceive it, right? It's not what happens, it's how we perceive it.
So Alberto, how do you, with all 3 of your kids, you said your daughter's really focused and she's got that drive. But do you, like for me, I try and, like, people ask me, and I always say, I'll support my son in anything that he wants to do, but I do want him to get a jiu-jitsu black belt because I just think it'll set him up so well for life, And so there's such a balance as a parent between how much you encourage, but also I don't want him to burn out at 14 and then hate jiu-jitsu. So it's like, how do you find that balance with your kids?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I've been doing it for a long time, right? Teaching and kids programs and things. And I asked a lot of the Gracie kids, how they grew up, what was their jiu-jitsu journey like when they were kids. And they always, like most of them said, it was like they were playing. It wasn't like stressful. It was like they're playing jiu-jitsu, you know? And so I always remembered that. And with my kids, and I never forced them. I definitely wanted them to be on the mat and get the benefits, the character benefits for life, right? Like you said, and I want them all to have jiu-jitsu in their lives. One of my daughters, we'll see, but my son for sure. They all train jiu-jitsu. My daughters are 14 now. My son's 16. They all train jiu-jitsu, but they all don't become black belts. I won't be. I'll forgive, but I want them all to have jiu-jitsu in their lives to make them be their best, reach their potential. And I really believe in jiu-jitsu as a tool more than anything. You're in a bad position, you don't panic, you stay relaxed, you find your way out, and you keep going, right? And all the other, situations that we do on the mat.
I couldn't agree more that the idea of the character development aspect is just, I think, so good. And also just the confidence. If the world's become a bit of a violent place the last years, it's got all crazy. Just even if they never actually use it, that they walk with that confidence and the ability to defend themselves. And especially for your daughters, I think that's so cool. That I train with a few savage females at the gym, and I'm always so impressed by them because jiu-jitsu is hard. And then you think about most females are just so much smaller, so you're just always dealing with this huge weight discrepancy. And then there's the sweaty, gross guys. As a female, that must be tough too. And they don't complain. They train hard. So I love seeing that. I find it for me that they actually motivate me more than some of the guys at the gym, just because I feel like they have so many. It's so much harder for them, but they still come and they don't complain and they train really hard. So I love seeing the females at the gym.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? More so, of course, the self-defense aspect, right? But staying calm under pressure, right? If there's some kind of situation, to be able to make the right decisions, maybe to get out of the situation or to get help or whatever you need. I see that, and not just for women, right? But like for first responders, like high-level operators, like you're able to stay calm, okay, figure it out, not panic, right? And man, for women, that's for all of us, right? It's everything, making the right decisions in a stressful situation.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Alberto, because that's one thing. I'm just reading this book and it's talking about the controlling kind of the monkey mind. It says every time you're in a situation, you have this immediate response, and that's almost like our reptilian brain, the kind of fight or flight. But then if you just give it a few seconds and you stay calm, then probably the correct response is going to come. But so many times in life, we jump to the immediate response, and that's not the right one. So I never thought about that. That's exactly what you're getting from jiu-jitsu is under pressure, you're staying calm, and then you're more likely to have a better reaction to anything in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The amygdala, right, has that fight or flight response that, what do you do when you're in some guys in psychotronic who trying to get you in a submission? You breathe, focus on your breath. Okay. Find your space, look for the space, right? Look for solutions. And then once you find it, or you're looking, figuring it out. And then once you find it, you take it, right? Otherwise you just protect yourself, right? In the meantime. So I think that's definitely application to everything and all and everything that you do in life.
Yeah, no, that's so true. One thing I'm very impressed. I just got your video on Tac-Fit. And you're showing all these exercises, and I'm like, man, Alberto, your body looks pretty good. Like, I can't straighten either of my elbows, and I'm like, I'm going to try doing some of this stuff. But I love the idea of Tac-Fit. Can you talk a little bit about how you discovered that? And because I think for older athletes like us, where you have all these injuries, you and I, we have to train differently now in our 40s to how we were doing in our 20s and 30s. And so I love the idea of doing more things that you're showing on your Tac-Fit, because I think it's just going to help me with my longevity.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. I love jiu-jitsu. I love everything about jiu-jitsu, but it's definitely missing these components, right? Moving in all the different directions. We overuse, we misuse. He calls it disuse too, right? And so understanding that, getting that body awareness of what you need to do to stay healthy, keep your body healthy, right? Because it's the same patterns, right? We all sit down too much. We're all flexion, like flexing things. We need to open ourselves up as well, right? And so just starting to understand that and then doing it, right? You can talk all about it. You're not going to get good at jiu-jitsu by talking about it. You get good at jiu-jitsu by doing it, right? And so doing it. And so integrating it in part of your routine is really important. So I got involved with Tac-Fit. For my first UFC fight, Scott Sonnen, the founder of Tac-Fit, my first jiu-jitsu coach actually was a Navy SEAL, introduced me to him after my, not actually, it was my second UFC fight. He's like, you need to get with this guy named Scott Sonnen. And so I trusted him. I was like, okay. And so that's why I met him. And I got thrown on my head. My big takeaway, what got me really focused on it was I got supleed. And so my neck was like, I was really hurt, and I had a fight coming up. And usually it's like 4 to 6 weeks, right? And maybe they give you some pain medication, and then they maybe talk about surgery, and then it never really fully heals, right? That's about right? Most of the time. And so then he did an assessment with me, and then he showed me some movements that I could do to heal my neck. It's like every time you have pain, that's your cue to move your neck like this, okay? And so I did it, and I got better in 1 week.
Wow.
Better in 1 week. Okay. And I was so mind blown by that situation that I never forgot about it. I was like, wow, I can heal myself with movement. That's crazy. I had like these top trainers. I had the best of the best trainers in my life. And nobody ever showed me that I could heal myself with movement. It was that one thing that I never forgot. And I always wanted to do Tac-Fit after that. This is back in 2007, 8. I'm not sure what month it was, around that time, end of 2007, beginning of 2008. And so I went to the website. It was called rmaxinternational.com, something like that. I wasn't sure if the trainers were any good. But Scott Sonnen was always really kind to me because he was a grappler himself. He developed this whole thing called Mastering the Saddle. And like, what's his name? The Danner Death Squad, the early guys, Eddie Cummings, and these guys, like, they studied his stuff, like as far as leg locks, he's just smart. He's like an alien, Scott Sonnen, but he was a grappler himself. And so anyway, that's why he helped me out. He's like, oh yeah, for sure. I'd love to. It'd be an honor. And so he helped me out. And so he was always really kind to me when I asked him questions. And then when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2012, he was always there and helping me out with whatever he could do, like on social media or whatever. He always took the time, and I really appreciated that. He really cared, and that's how I stayed connected to him. It was good because I got reconnected to him after that diagnosis, and then, so in 2012, every 5 years, they make you do a brain MRI to fight, and they found these lesions in 2007. But it wasn't too big. They didn't say anything. But 2012, they grew, and then they did some tests, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you can't fight anymore. We can't let you fight. It looks like you have multiple sclerosis." They did a bunch of tests and stuff, and then basically treated me like my life was gonna be over. And one of the guys was like, I could end up in a wheelchair. I just remember, I don't know if he said exactly those words, but he said something about wheelchair, this and that. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, crazy. Like basically, but they treated me like my life was over. And I remember asking the doctor, hey, can I still do jiu-jitsu? And he's like, sure, as long as there's no, head trauma. And I was like, okay. So I registered again because I was fighting only for those years, MMA. And so I registered for my first tournament, and then I did good. And then I was like, okay. And I kept going. And I kind of had like a little fear in the back of my head, was like, wow, like, maybe I'm not going to be able to do this in 6 months. And so I went all in and just competed in as many tournaments, like those master divisions. That's what I was asking you before we started the podcast, which tournament that was, that we were maybe supposed to compete, But I did a world tour. I traveled all over the world, and I treated like it was my last, my life. Maybe I'm not going to be able to do it again. I literally went all over the world: Europe, South America, Brazil, Amazon, Asia, everywhere, Abu Dhabi, And then I had a spiritual moment in Spain. So I had like Nogi Worlds. We were talking about names and stuff. It was really cool because I got to go compete against like Roberto. So I had the Nogi Worlds, and and I was like a little bit heavier, because I wasn't cutting weight, and he was always a heavier guy. Anyway, after the Nugget Worlds, I went to Spain, and man, I did like back to back to back. I did a match, did a seminar too in Stockholm. And then when I went to Berlin to do a tournament there, and asked one of my buddies to go with me, bailing out, so I ended up doing it. And the last stop was Madrid in Spain. So I went to LA, went to Berlin, then dropped in Stockholm, Madrid. And so I thought I was just, I would always do the gi, no gi, and weight and open weight, because there's less people, right? It's not like all these matches. And I had a good style of game too. Anyway, I wasn't feeling good before the Madrid. The night before, I wasn't able to eat. And then I went out and met my first guy, and we kind of talked before, became a little bit friends. And then we competed, and then he dropped his weight on my stomach. And I was like, oh man, like I did my move, whatever. And then he dropped the weight on my stomach. And then I was like, oh man, I have to throw up, And I didn't throw up. I held it in, and I was still in the game and still trying to win. And I ended up losing the match. And as soon as the match was over, I went off to the side and I threw up, and I had food poisoning. And I was like a ghost, And then I went out again, and the second match, and I ended up getting choked out unconscious in Madrid. And waking up like in the gymnasium there, like, what the heck am I doing here? And I was totally, totally crushed. I'd never been choked out in my life. Not that it's a big deal. It happens, right? I'd never had happened to me before in training or whatever, And so I was like, wow, okay, like I was just super down. And the first guy I went against is like, oh, you're going to do the open weight. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And I was just really, really, it just felt like crap. You have like the flu, right? You feel like you have the flu. I couldn't drink water, couldn't eat. I just felt like crap, And then he's like, oh, maybe you feel better in a few hours. And I was like, all right. So I put my name down, and then I sat down, and I couldn't, like I said, I couldn't drink, couldn't eat, and I just felt like so weak, And then I started thinking like, man, I believe in my technique. And it started to make me feel good. And so I kept saying it over and over and over for probably a couple hours, like a mantra. And then I went out there, won my first match, second match, and won the whole thing, won the open weight, And then it ended up doing the no-gi after that. And it was such a spiritual moment for me. It really taught me like the power of the mind, mind over matter, like that martial arts teaches you. Just like you don't know how you do it, but you figure it out. And I was like, man, it's not a matter if I can win, but like I'm going to win, like this MS thing. And I just have to figure out how. And so my next step, just subconsciously, took me to the Tac-Fit certification. And that was the last kind of tournament I did, was in Madrid. And the next chapter was my Tac-Fit journey. And so I went to the certification, met Scott Sonnen again, and met these guys. There's some guys actually from Brazil, from the city that I lived in, Belo Horizonte. It's out of all the places, Bellingham, it's like a couple exits away from Canada in Washington State. And then I was like, wow, this is good for me. And so I kept going. And then again, I got focused, and I went to all these different certifications. They had an agenda, or a schedule of all the certifications and things. And so I just went to every single one I could go to. And I went on this also kind of a world tour and journey as well, just learning, because the more I trained, the harder I trained, the better I got. A Men's Health magazine called it the world's smartest workout, because really, as I've done all these applied neuroscience courses the last, 7 years, 6, 7 years. And man, it's crazy. Every single piece has been meticulously thought about or applied. So you hear all these fancy podcasts like Huberman and this and that, and they talk about all these things. But this guy, he made it. Just do it, and you'll get the benefits. Just do it. Do this. Don't and I can tell you why after he does. Trust me. I'll tell you all the psychobabble. So I shouldn't say the psychobabble, but he'll tell you all the knowledge. But you're not going to be ready for it. And then when you start to feel it in your body, just like jiu-jitsu, then you're like, oh wow. And then you understand. Then he starts to teach you about the whys and things like that. But it's a recovery-based system. It began tactical fitness, Tac-Fit, and it was born from first responders. His own dad and his own learning disabilities caused by childhood trauma. It was born from that, from his own, these learning disabilities and trauma from childhood, and finding his learning style through martial arts. And so he's like this genius, this, say alien, but like really this genius. And he developed this system from that. And his focus was definitely on first responders. And the number one killer is the stress. And number one killer for all of us is the stress. Yeah. So how do you recover from stress? And also learning, right? His supposed learning disabilities, right? Dyslexia, yeah, whatever, like all this stuff, but it's not. It's like, it's connecting movement sophistication. How do you learn? How do you learn a jiu-jitsu technique? How can everybody learn a berimbolo? Can everybody learn a berimbolo? Yes, they can, but you have to know how to teach them properly. Movement sophistication, making things easier, right? Making them harder. So that's it, he has it all in there, like simple, compound, complex as far as movement sophistication. And then, just every part of it, the structure, we teach about structure, the 7 key components, breath, and all that stuff is technique, and keeping your technique under stress. That's where the magic happens.
Well, but it's definitely something I really want to dive into, because just like I said, I got your video and I was looking at it, and it's, I know enough that I know it's gonna help me a lot. And I love what you said about so many of the problems we have are due to stress and lack of movement, because it's just so true. I look at my biggest problem is I drive a lot for work, and I also sit a lot at a laptop. And I know how I feel when I haven't been moving. And so, and I know, stress is at all-time highs, addiction to SSRIs and all these depression and all these problems we're having right now. I think so much of it is because a lot of people have this underlying stress and they don't have a positive release. So I really, really love that. And a quick shout out to Nick Lamagna before I forget, for connecting us. Nick's such a great guy. He told me he was at your gym, and he said, you don't just have a gym, you have a whole wellness center there. And I think that's so awesome. You have that. I wanted to ask you about where you got that entrepreneurial spirit, but you've had it since you're in your early 20s, right? So with your early gym in Santa Fe, you've had that mindset.
I don't know. I have great role models, like my grandfather. He was blind. He was an attorney, but he was an investor and this and that. And I guess he was like in a way, like a father figure too, my mom's dad. So I think just subconsciously, I just saw that and I was like, you can, if you think you can, right? And so just seeing him, I think, really set a belief in myself that I can do whatever I put my mind to. And then my early jiu-jitsu journey, right? Never giving up on whatever you do, really solidified that as well. So those pieces are key, I think, for success,
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a reason that they do placebo trials, because placebo is real. Like if you believe it, you do have the benefits. So I absolutely love that. Alberto, like your gym is Legacy Academy in LA. You got a whole center there, Choose Star Recovery Center. I'm definitely going to come out and visit. And I want to meet you in person, because I've known of you for such a long time. Recently, I've known more about you. I'm just a huge fan, and I really appreciate it. You didn't disappoint. Nick was right in all of the great things said about you, and you have an awesome story. And I love what you said about when you were young, and you figured it out, but you didn't look too far ahead. You just put everything into what you're doing now, and I love that advice. And even the overcoming MS, like the way you didn't just let it defeat you, you had that same mindset of no, I'm gonna keep going, because you're right. I mean, if you take advice from doctors, most doctors don't look after their own bodies, that they just want to prescribe you drugs. I don't think they give the best advice a lot of time. And definitely coming from England, I just watched that documentary Painkiller, and it's about oxycodone. We don't have that in England. Like if you see a doctor in England, they don't just suddenly give you all these different medication. Normally they talk to you a bit first. They talk about lifestyle. So I love your whole approach to life, man. You're really inspiring, Alberto.
Like the MS, right? What is that? Multiple sclerosis. Your immune system attacks your myelin. So it's like you have a nerve, if you have a wire, electrical wire, it's the rubber around the wire, right? For the electrical signal to get to wherever you want. So if you want to grab a cup, you'd be able to do it, but if you lose the myelin, you basically lose your ability to kind of walk, to do things, right? To even talk and things. And I had all those issues. I started to have all those issues. I mean, I kind of didn't accept, right? Luckily all these things helped me. And as I started to learn and do all these courses, when you train in this type of way, like the right amount of stress, because too much stress is not good, right? Working out too hard is not good. You want the right amount of stress, like Goldilocks zone, Scott calls it. And so we train everything 68% heart rate max. We just train the right amount. Everything is right. Everything is thought out. And within that, you get new brain cells, the arborization, so the cells get more connected. So you get smarter, right? You get new brain cells, arborization, and the myelinization occurs. So for me, that's what happened with the MS. That's what's crazy. So as long as I do this, and all my buddies, all my friends that do this as well, it's beautiful because they see the benefits, they feel the benefits, they get better, you know? And mobility, Scott is the guy who created the term for it in the fitness world of mobility. But man, mobility is life. So John, it's not just a word, it's like life. When you lose your mobility, you lose your it's the fountain of youth. It's like, that's the active aging when you lose your mobility. When you go to old folks' home, like people can barely move their heads, right? And so if you lose your mobility, you're getting older. So that's we all have to focus on, right? Is like the mobility and how important it is, you know? And so you need some strength also to also improve your mobility. So it's like a balancing thing, right? Tac-Fit teaches you all those things. So
I can't wait.
we'll have to do a Tac-Fit class when you come out.
Alberto, can I ask you just one last thing? Because as a new parent myself, what is there one parenting advice you can give me? Just
self-control. Don't try to control everything. Just love and support and if it's in their best interest to get upset with them, okay, you got to do that, you know. But I don't know, just love and support and just be present, you know. Be present, you know. I think be there, you know. Be there emotionally. Be present, you know. And I think Jiu-Jitsu helps that. Tac-Fit helps that, and it's great. You do that, you know, because it makes us better people. So I think just being present is key, you know, with our family, our kids, giving that example, because when we're present, they're going to be present with us and they're going to be present people.
I love that because we live in such a distracted world. Alberto, thank you so much. I'll put links to Tac-Fit and to your academy, and I just really appreciate your time. And I'm so glad we met, and I can't wait to shake your hand in person.
Yes, looking forward to it. Thank you, brother.